think going through marriage, through stardom, through murder cases, through all of this crazy record deal stuff, I think that'll mature somebody. I think all of those.
Nate Dogg, a West Coast icon. A voice heard on some of the biggest records in hip-hop history. A man who once lived in a house on the hills, drove a vintage Cadillac, and wore gold with the calm confidence of someone who had made it out of the streets. But after Nate Dogg passed away, everything collapsed. The house he left behind for his children turned into a legal battlefield. The family fell apart. Debt came to light, and his legacy was dragged through the courts. How did a man who once made millions from music end his life surrounded by instability, conflict, and unfinished business? In this video, we retrace the entire life of Nate Dogg. From a boy singing in church to the voice that became the soul of West Coast hip-hop, to a man repeatedly pulled into violence courtrooms and never-ending lawsuits. A story about money power and the real cost of fame. Nathaniel Dwayne Hale was born on August 19, 1969, right in the heart of the West Coast, Long Beach, California. Growing up in a busy urban neighborhood filled with both opportunity and street-level danger, young Nathaniel was surrounded by a powerful cultural mix. The laid-back groove of funk, the deep emotion of soul, and most importantly, the commanding presence of gospel music. Few people would expect that one of the defining voices of gangsta rap came from a deeply religious household. His father was a pastor, and Nate Dogg's childhood was closely tied to wooden church pews and the sacred atmosphere of community gatherings. Beyond music, the relationships formed during his teenage years would play a crucial role in Nathaniel's life. At Long Beach Polytechnic High School, Nate met people who would later become inseparable from hip-hop history. Warren G and his cousin, Snoop Dogg. Three young men growing up together among revving engines, graffiti-covered walls, and music pouring out from every corner of the neighborhood. They shared the same belief. Music was more than sound. It was the voice of an entire generation. This bond was not just friendship, it was the beginning of a destined alliance, a brutal turning point. Dropping out of school to pick up a gun. At 17, while others his age were still stressing over final exams, Nathaniel Dwayne Hale made a decision that would completely change his life. He dropped out of high school. But he did not choose the streets. He chose discipline. Just 30 days after leaving home, Nate enlisted in the United States Marine Corps, one of the most elite and demanding forces in the world. During 3 years of service at Camp Schwab in Japan, until his discharge in 1989, he worked as an ammunition specialist. Guns and military discipline forged a hardened Nate Dogg. In 1989, after 3 years of service, Nate returned to civilian life with a new sense of confidence. He was not just a singer with rare technique and emotion. He was a man who had been tested. The church choir boy was gone. In his place stood a hardened man stepping into an entirely new battle. Music career. From the shadows of the streets to the soul of the West Coast. Returning from the military, Nate Dogg did not look for a quiet office job. He reconnected with his two brothers in spirit, Snoop Dogg and Warren G, to form a group called 213, named after Long Beach's area code at the time. In a cramped attic, Nate was more than just a singer. He was the architect shaping the early sound of G-Funk, a haunting blend of raw hip-hop rhythms and smooth soul melodies. It was here that the trio created demos that shook the underground scene, laying the first bricks for a music empire on the verge of exploding. Everything truly took off when 213's demos reached the ears of the sound wizard Dr. Dre. Almost instantly, Dr. Dre realized that Nate Dogg's voice was the missing soul piece in his musical vision. In 1992, the legendary album The Chronic was released. Nate Dogg appeared not as a rapper, but as a hook master. His deep, masculine voice slipped into every track, creating a signature West Coast sound that felt both dangerous and strangely seductive. By 1993, when Snoop Dogg released his debut album Doggy Style, Nate Dogg officially became the ultimate weapon. The album was not only a commercial earthquake, but also a historic milestone. Nate Dogg's presence sent out a blunt message. If you wanted a hit on the West Coast, you had to have Nate Dogg's voice. Mentioning Nate Dogg means recalling moments that now belong in the temple of hip-hop. Regulate with Warren G, a street ballad that reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, became one of the greatest collaborations of all time. Ain't No Fun was a declaration of a carefree, reckless, yet irresistibly captivating style. Then came The Next Episode. There is probably no one in the world who does not recognize the iconic closing line, "Smoke weed every day." In just the final 3 seconds, Nate Dogg created a pop culture imprint that has lasted for decades. Nate Dogg's true power lay in the fact that he was one of the rare artists who could stand above every battle line. No matter how intense the conflict between the East Coast and the West Coast became, Nate's voice was respected everywhere. He collaborated with the biggest icons, regardless of style. Nate Dogg shared powerful moments on screen with Tupac, blended with finesse alongside Mos Def, and most notably achieved perfect chemistry with the king of rap Eminem and the gritty group Mobb Deep. These wide-ranging collaborations proved an obvious truth. Nate Dogg's voice was a one-of-a-kind instrument. It could merge with New York's edge, the Southern swagger, or California's laid-back freedom. He was not limited by geography or genre. Nate Dogg was the bridge of the entire hip-hop culture. If you only listened to Nate Dogg's music, you would think he was extremely rich. And you would not be wrong. But not entirely right either. Nate Dogg was not the type of rapper to show off wealth with Lamborghini supercars or diamonds covering his body. His wealth was not loud or flashy. It lived in invisible power. The moment he opened his mouth, the song instantly became a hit. Fame, wealth, and lifestyle. The poise of a street gentleman. The 1990s were the era when G-Funk completely dominated the charts. And in that time, Nate Dogg was not just an artist, he was a brand guarantee. With every high-value hook, the numbers in Nate's bank account jumped, elevating him into the upper tier of the West Coast entertainment world. Financial success carried Nate Dogg away from the dusty streets of Long Beach to a grand mansion standing proudly on a hillside in Southern California. This house was not just a piece of property. It was a declaration of success from a man who rose from the bottom of society using nothing but his voice. Inside, the space was designed to be wide open with high ceilings and natural light flowing into every living area. A large living room fit to host powerful figures in the rap world. A private recording studio carefully soundproofed so Nate could record whenever inspiration struck. Every detail served a life that was both luxurious and practical, true to the mindset of a man who valued peace over showing off. The space was big enough to impress, yet the layout showed that its owner never needed to prove his wealth to anyone. For Nate Dogg, that house was where he could take off the image of the king of hooks and return to being an ordinary man. A father, a husband, a brother within the Long Beach community. Unlike many artists who invested only in luxury brands, Nate Dogg chose a very different path. He built businesses right in Long Beach, the place where he grew up. The barbershop Nate Dogg opened quickly became a familiar spot for the local community. This was not just a place to get a haircut. It was where people gathered, where street stories were passed down, where the name Nate Dogg did not mean a star, but family. The way Nate Dogg spent his money was never loud or tastelessly flashy. He shaped a personal image defined by elegance. Not oversized tracksuits, but custom-tailored suits paired with finely crafted custom-ordered diamond jewelry. He appeared beside a polished black Cadillac, carrying the presence of a man in full control. Calm, cool, yet radiating an authority that commanded respect. Even at the peak of fame, Nate Dogg never turned his back on his street roots. To him, cars were not tools to show off wealth, but cultural statements. And Nate Dogg's car collection was where the spirit of Long Beach lowrider culture was expressed most clearly. The 1964 Chevrolet Impala is considered a sacred icon in the lowrider world, and it was also the car most closely tied to Nate Dogg's image. In its original form, the 1964 Impala came equipped with V8 engines ranging from roughly 5.4 to 6.7 liters, producing between 250 and 425 horsepower depending on configuration. At the height of Nate Dogg's career, a stock 1964 Impala was valued at around $40,000 to $70,000. But for a true enthusiast like Nate, the real value was in customization. A fully built Impala could reach $100,000 to $150,000, or even more when carrying a strong personal signature. Alongside the Impala, Nate Dogg was also closely associated with classic Cadillac models, most often Fleetwoods or DeVille's symbols of West Coast power. Large V8 engines tuned for smoothness rather than speed. long heavy frames that felt like sitting on a throne. A ride so smooth it barely vibrated. A stock classic Cadillac typically ranged from $30,000 to $60,000, but once customized in a high-end lowrider style, the value could exceed $120,000. Whenever Nate Dogg appeared in public, it was always an event. From prestigious music award shows to private industry gatherings, he was consistently the center of attention. But what earned the deepest respect was the company he kept. Nate often appeared as part of the most powerful dream team in rap history, standing alongside the raw
Nate Dogg had the
intensity of
ability
Tupac,
to make you
the
feel
cold
every
presence
word,
of Ice
every
Cube,
emotion.
and
His
the
soulful
laid-back
vocals had a way
confidence
of touching the
Dog
deepest
Pound.
parts of your soul,
Among such
leaving a
dominant
lasting impact that
personalities,
few artists
Nate Dogg
could,
remained
establishing
grounded in his
himself
own
as a
identity.
cornerstone within
A
the
calm
industry.
gentleman,
Nate Dogg
the
possessed a
connective
voice
thread,
that
and an irreplaceable soul in every major moment. But the seeds of family tragedy were quietly planted within Nate's own wealth. The real estate that exploded in 2014 near the end of his life. Nate Dogg's net worth was estimated at $500,000. 3 years after Nate Dogg passed away, what many believed had settled suddenly erupted into a fierce legal battle. At the center of the dispute was a property under Nate Dogg's name, with plans to place it on the market at an estimated price of $340,000. On paper, it was simply a home sale. But for Nate Dogg's family, it was a ticking time bomb. The sale was no longer about money. It became a painful question. Who had the right to decide the fate of what Nate Dogg left behind? The executor of Nate's estate wanted to sell the house to settle outstanding debts. However, greed and the fear of losing inheritance pushed the family into open internal warfare. On one side were estate managers trying to clear debts. On the other were family members strongly opposing the sale. The situation became so intense that a judge had to step in to decide the fate of the house, turning Nate Dogg's legacy into a bitter point of public dispute. In his original will, Nate wanted to leave his home to his 6 children, but harsh reality stripped that wish away. Due to financial difficulties in the final years of his life, Nate fell behind on mortgage payments. As a result, the memory-filled house in Long Beach was seized. Nate's children not only lost their father, but were also forced to witness fierce conflicts between siblings and their own grandmother, Ruth Holmes. The conflict reached its peak when Nate's children publicly accused Ruth of deliberately trying to seize control of the estate for personal gain. They claimed she had no concern for her grandchildren's interests, focusing only on the massive royalty income. Mediation sessions turned into explosive courtroom confrontations, where family secrets were laid bare in front of the public. The house, once a symbol of success, became proof of both financial collapse and emotional breakdown. In sharp contrast to the glamour of the red carpet, the 4-bedroom house had fallen into severe disrepair. Despite its unique design with signature arched windows, 2 cozy fireplaces, and a charming covered front porch, it now stood in decay. The living room and kitchen, once warm family spaces, were covered in dust, completely abandoned. No signs of life. No repairs, private life, and personal relationships. The man behind the voice. Beyond the stage lights and the hits blasting across the radio, Nate Dogg lived a very different life when he came home. If on record, he was the king of hooks, the voice that controlled the emotional direction of an entire rap song, then in real life, Nate was the kind of man who put family above everything else. The relationship and marriage between Nate Dogg and LaToya Calvin were never put on display by the media. No romantic scandals, no loud tabloid appearances. What the public saw was a quiet bond that lasted for many years, a relationship that existed outside the spotlight, where fame was never the deciding factor. After Nate Dogg passed away, LaToya Calvin chose to step away from public view, opting for a private life. No interviews, no media battles, no attempts to capitalize on the name of the man she lost. If there is one legacy that matters most when it comes to Nate Dogg, it is not houses, cars, or material wealth. It is his 6 children, his greatest pride and his emotional anchor during the final years of his life. His oldest son, Nathaniel Hale Jr., has been the most public figure in carrying on his father's legacy. He stepped into music not to wear the spotlight, but to make sure the name Nate Dogg is never forgotten. For Nathaniel, music is not just a career, it is a responsibility. The rest of his children have largely chosen quiet lives, staying away from cameras and headlines. Even without standing on stage, they carry the spirit and values Nate Dogg left behind: calm strength, loyalty to family, and a deep connection to their roots. Legal troubles. When the shadow followed the legend, Nate Dogg's path was never lined with roses alone. Running parallel to his musical rise was a long series of legal troubles, simmering persistent and growing heavier over time, like a shadow that refused to let go of a man who came up from the streets. It all began in the early 1990s, when Nate Dogg had not yet become a global icon. In 1991, he was unexpectedly charged with robbery at a check changer store, and not long after, he was accused of robbing a Taco Bell in San Pedro. 2 consecutive cases that could have ended the career of a young artist still finding his footing. But in court, Nate Dogg was acquitted in both cases. Legally, he walked free. Visually, the first crack had already formed. By 1996, Nate Dogg was no longer as fortunate. This time, he was convicted on a drug-related charge in Los Angeles County. The case did not explode across the media, but it quietly added another damaging mark to his legal record, one that would later come back to haunt him. The true turning point came in 2000 in what is widely considered the most serious and darkest chapter of his life. Nate Dogg was charged with a series of severe crimes: kidnapping, domestic violence, terrorist threats, arson. The case stemmed from a conflict with his former girlfriend and her mother. According to allegations, Nate burned the mother's car and assaulted his ex-girlfriend, accusations powerful enough to destroy an entire career overnight. As it seemed, every door was closing. Dr. Dre stepped in. More than a musical collaborator, Dre posted bail for Nate Dogg in the amount of $1 million, a move that reflected both the severity of the case and the level of power operating behind the scenes of West Coast hip-hop. In the end, most of the serious charges were dismissed. However, Nate Dogg pleaded guilty to illegal firearm possession. The issue was not a new act of violence, but his past. Due to prior convictions, he was legally prohibited from owning a gun. The sentence was handed down: a fine and 3 years of probation. On paper, not a crushing punishment, but enough to confirm that Nate Dogg had entered dangerous legal territory. The trouble did not stop there. In 2002, during a tour bus inspection in Arizona, police discovered 113 grams of marijuana and 2 handguns. Nate Dogg was arrested with bail set at approximately $3,500. This time, the weapons charges were dropped, but he pleaded guilty to marijuana possession, resulting in mandatory drug counseling, probation, and community service. With each incident, the legal noose tightened another loop. By 2006, the darkness returned in a familiar form: domestic violence. Nate Dogg was charged with felony burglary, phone harassment, assault, witness intimidation, and violation of a restraining order, all stemming from a dispute with his girlfriend at the time. The consequences were lasting: a 10-year ban on firearm ownership, 3 years of probation, mandatory participation in a domestic violence education program. The legal system was no longer lenient. Just when it seemed everything had hit bottom in 2008, Nate Dogg faced yet another wave of accusations. He was alleged to have threatened his estranged wife via email, stalked her on the I-405 freeway, and was charged with 2 counts of criminal threats, 1 count of stalking, and driving under the influence of drugs. This time, Nate Dogg pleaded not guilty. And once again, a familiar detail emerged: his wife refused to cooperate with prosecutors. As a result, all charges were dismissed. On paper, Nate Dogg escaped severe punishment multiple times. But reality told a different story. Nearly 2 decades of legal troubles left scars that could not be erased, not just in court records, but in his life itself. Behind the smooth voice that softened every rap song was a man constantly caught between fame and personal storms. And when looking back at the full journey, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Nate Dogg was not only fighting to hold his place in music, he was fighting to keep his past from dragging him down and from pulling others down with him. Charitable. What Nate Dogg did when the lights were off. One of Nate Dogg's most meaningful contributions was his involvement with and support for the Positive Flow Foundation, an organization focused on providing educational resources, guidance, and life opportunities for at-risk youth in Long Beach. These were kids growing up surrounded by violence and hardship, easily pulled in the wrong direction if no one stepped in. Nate Dogg understood them better than anyone, because he had once been one of them. Through positive flow, Nate did more than donate money. He gave his time, his presence, and his voice. For many of these kids, simply meeting Nate Dogg, someone who had risen from the same streets they lived on, meant more than any speech ever could. He was living proof that change was possible. The Positive Flow Foundation helped open very real paths forward, supporting education, providing learning tools, offering life skills programs, and creating safe spaces where young people could stay away from violence and street temptation. Beyond his work with the foundation, Nate Dogg regularly took part in community events across Long Beach. He showed up at fundraisers and programs supporting children and struggling families, but rarely appeared as a star. Everyone who interacted with Nate Dogg shared the same impression. He did not give back to be remembered. He did it because he never forgot where he came from. That is why Nate Dogg's charitable legacy carries a meaning of its own. It was not loud, it was not carefully documented on paper, but it was deeply woven into the life of Long Beach. He became a model of a different kind of artist, one who got rich without abandoning the community, one who became famous without forgetting responsibility, health, and passing. When the voice began to fade. After nearly 2 decades living between stage lights, recording studios, and the biggest moments of West Coast hip-hop, Nate Dogg's body began to turn against the very man who had pushed it to the top. In 2007, the first stroke hit like a brutal warning. Nate Dogg collapsed. The left side of his body weakened and his mobility was noticeably reduced. For many artists, this would have been the end. But what shocked everyone was this. Nate's voice was still intact. That deep, raspy tone that defined an entire era remained untouched. His cognitive ability was stable. In that moment, people believed Nate Dogg would return. Doctors were hopeful about rehabilitation. Fans waited for a comeback, but it was only a fragile illusion before a greater storm. In 2008, Nate Dogg suffered a second stroke. This time his body could no longer hold up. His health declined rapidly, heavier and more devastating than before. Compounding damage began to erode both his physical strength and his spirit. The man who once controlled the rhythm of entire rap records now had to relearn how to control each breath. No more long recording sessions, no more tour nights, no more life in motion as a living legend. All that remained was a silent battle with a failing body. On the morning of March 15, 2011, in Long Beach, California, Nate Dogg took his final breath. He passed away at the age of 41. News of Nate Dogg's death spread like a true shock, not only to fans, but to the people who had stood beside him for decades. Snoop Dogg, his brother, his friend, his partner from the earliest days, expressed his grief in simple but heavy words. "We lost a true legend, one of the greatest voices hip-hop has ever known." Warren G., who created Regulate with Nate, one of hip-hop's most timeless records, was nearly devastated. To Warren, Nate Dogg was not just a musical partner, he was a piece of his life. The loss felt like losing half of his youth. Dr. Dre, the man who introduced Nate Dogg to the world through The Chronic, also paid tribute with deep respect. No long statements were needed because within the music industry, everyone understood one truth. Without Nate Dogg, G-Funk would never have been whole as the world came to know it. Many other artists, from Eminem and 50 Cent to names deeply tied to the West Coast, shared their grief. Across social media, radio, and hip-hop stations, Nate Dogg's voice played on repeat as if trying to hold on to something that could never return. Nate Dogg will always be remembered as the iconic voice of the West Coast. His life was a journey from the highest peaks of fame to the fractures behind the scenes. He did not leave behind only music. He left behind a larger question about legacy, the true cost of success, and what remains after the lights go out. Legacy and influence, the soul of the West Coast. Nate Dogg's greatest legacy lies in something that seems simple at first. He turned the hook into the soul of the entire song. Nate Dogg redefined the role of vocals in West Coast hip-hop. He brought soul funk and real emotion into street rap, creating a perfect balance between raw street energy and inner depth. G-Funk would never have truly been G-Funk without Nate Dogg's voice. King of hooks, A title no one could ever take. The title King of Hooks was not given by the media. It came from the artists themselves. Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Warren, G50 Cent, Eminem, Tupac. They all understood one truth. When Nate Dogg appeared on a record, that song instantly had a soul. His legacy is not measured by the number of solo albums, but by the hundreds of hits he helped create stretching from the 1990s deep into the 2000s. Very few artists manage to remain influential across generations without ever changing who they are. After Nate Dogg, hip-hop no longer viewed vocals as a secondary element. A new generation of artists was directly shaped by his influence. Rappers who blended singing into rap. Songs built around emotional hooks. From the West Coast to the mainstream, from the underground to the radio, Nate Dogg's imprint is everywhere, even when listeners do not immediately realize it. And the paradox is this: the further time moves forward, the more people understand just how important Nate Dogg truly was. Some legends live by the spotlight. Nate Dogg lived through sound. And as long as hip-hop continues to need a soul, Nate Dogg's voice will never stop being remembered. Which Nate Dogg song do you remember the most? Or what do you think is the greatest legacy he left behind? Let us know in the comments below. Do not forget to hit like and subscribe, so you do not miss upcoming videos where we continue breaking down the lives, fame, tragedy, and legacy of the names that shaped popular culture. See you in the next story.
Today's content may reference public figures, businesses, or social events. However, all mentions are intended for exploratory purposes only and are not meant as accusations or judgments. Stories like this, they leave a mark. If you want to keep digging into the truth and honor the legends, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You are now locked in with the Black Vault. What's your take on this? Let me know in the comments.